Hey, so we are starting a new series. We actually, in January of this year, started a whiteboard series. They became really successful. And so now we're actually branching out, starting a new series that will focus on gaming. And we're going to spotlight a lot of different companies in space. It's very new space, and I think that people need to get a spotlight and recognition and really understanding of this. We'll be focusing a lot less probably on research, unlike whiteboard series, and we'll be focusing on more like understanding the narrative behind every company, the learnings, the challenges, goals, and things like that. And we're gonna jump into the first one. We are here with Devin in New York. He's co-founder of OpenSea. And let's dive into the background.
Sure. Also, I'm Peter DiPaolo with Near. I'm in developer relations. And who are you?
I'm Sasha. I focus on business development here.
Cool. Let's jump right in.
Yep. So Devin, so what's your background? How did you get to start OpenSea? What did you do prior to this?
So prior to OpenSea, I was a developer at Pinterest. So worked kind of in consumer tech. I also left Pinterest, started a company in the personal finance space that was acquired by Credit Karma in San Francisco. And then around in mid-2017 was when my co-founder Alex and I started getting interested in Ethereum. Sort of like a lot of folks in tech at the time, went down the rabbit hole of understanding crypto economics, blockchain, reading a lot of white papers, sort of the typical narrative. And I think what inspired OpenSea was really the idea that you could build consumer-facing, more mainstream-oriented apps on blockchains that weren't just around either buying illegal items with Bitcoin or financial speculation, right? So CryptoKitties was the first company that attempted that, and they did a lot of really good work in user onboarding, and it was really tough at the time, right? And I think that really got a lot of people in tech thinking about what are the other sorts of things that might be the first apps to take off. And one, for us, you know, the exciting thing about CryptoKitties was it was the first time that you really owned something in the digital world. We've had digital assets that are valuable for a very long time. Game items sell for tens of thousands of dollars already, but the new ownership model introduced by CryptoKitties really, we thought, would bring higher degrees of liquidity to these assets and higher ability for people to value them. And so that was the idea with OpenSea, is a marketplace for all sorts of digital assets on blockchains, starting with things like CryptoKitties, so games, but ultimately, and already we've started expanding to other assets outside of gaming. So things like event tickets, things like sort of the blockchain equivalent of domain names, and you know, maybe even one day physical assets as well.
So I want to hone in on one of those points. Is so CryptoKitties comes out. It gets a lot of buzz. People in the community and outside of the community are hearing about it. What in the world was missing? Like, why was CryptoKitties not enough? Why did you need to start this company?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I think CryptoKitties was a very interesting phenomenon if we look back on it, because at the end of the day, technically you could have built the CryptoKitties experience without blockchain, technically, right? So a lot of it, I mean, you couldn't have marketed as that without, with being honest about what it was, but it was a vertically integrated experience where the marketplace was on CryptoKitties.co, the assets were on CryptoKitties.co. It was, at the end of the day, it was kind of a trading game. There have been trading and breeding games for a long time.
Right, like Neopets.
Neopets, yeah. But what was interesting, I think, or the kind of signal that we saw after CryptoKitties launch was the lesser known projects that built things inside of the sort of emerging small CryptoKitties ecosystem. So those were things like Kitty Hats, which allowed you to accessorize your CryptoKitties, Kitty Race, which allowed you to race your CryptoKitties. And these were things that, maybe it would be possible to kind of finagle to get to work in a centralized ecosystem, but really this was like taking advantage of what it meant to own an asset on the blockchain, which was that other developers could come and permissionlessly build other experiences.
Right.
So what we saw was we knew, I think it was kind of obvious at the time, like that people saw CryptoKitties in the gaming community, and definitely they were going to try other sorts of blockchain things
Sure.
given the CryptoKitties success. And the big leap of faith was maybe there's an opportunity for marketplaces that exist outside of the game, and maybe not every game builds a marketplace.
Right.
And I think the proof of concept for that was there were a couple games that launched after CryptoKitties. One was called Mytherium, which was kind of a card game. Another one was called Crypto Saga, which was a role-playing game. And neither of those games build marketplaces. So there was actually demand from real users, albeit a small number of users,
Right.
to trade these assets.
Right.
Another really interesting one at the time was a game called Crypto Celebrities. And are you guys familiar with
No,
Crypto
not at all.
Celebrities? So Crypto Celebrities was a very interesting game because you could buy a crypto celebrity collectible. So for example, you could buy the Donald Trump crypto celebrity. And then the contract was written such that another account could immediately snatch that crypto collectible for a higher price, so 20% upgrade, right? So the whole game, it was actually, the term that's used to describe these games in general is called a hot potato game.
Oh, right.
And the whole idea is you're trying to buy up this asset, but hopefully someone else will buy it after you so that you make a profit, right? Because someone has to buy it at a higher price. The interesting thing about that was it's a market that's very constrained, right? You have to buy it at a higher price. You can't sell it on their site for a lower price. But it's also ERC 721 compatible, so it's a CryptoKitties-like asset, which means that you could build a marketplace, which is what we did, that allows you to sell these at a lower price. So some of the weirdest stuff that happened really early on in the ecosystem was folks who had bought, actually this is our record sale to date, and this is because Ether at the time I think was around 1K, was someone had bought the Donald Trump crypto celebrity on the crypto celebrity site for 100 ETH. And that's 100 ETH that they sunk into this contract, right? No one else was buying it, so they put it on sale on OpenSea for 85 ETH.
Oh,
and someone bought it
interesting.
at 85 ETH.
Trying to recoup some of their investment there.
Exactly. So it was the only way to sell a crypto celebrity at a loss.
Wow, cool.
And it was, it was an example of bringing an efficient market to sort of a semi-liquid asset, but in other cases, assets that had no liquidity.
Right.
So that was kind of a really exciting time for us. There were a lot of really big sales, but it was, as it is now, a really small group of people actually like playing these.
Right. The precedence there is really exciting. Like the fact that that's a first, that, the idea that somebody provided something, they provided a platform to do something, some kind of game mechanic, and there's no way, like, I'm guessing if Ethereum was close to 1K, it was probably pretty close to going, pretty close to the crash. Yeah. Somebody's gonna see that and go, oh shoot, this is worth a lot of money right now, this is real money. And it dawns on them they want to get rid of it, and there's no specific way to do that. You provide a way for precedence to happen, something new to happen.
Yeah.
The second piece, which is really, really interesting to me, is people throw around the word permissionless a lot. But I cannot think of a better example of permissionless than what happened with CryptoKitties, which I think a lot of people are not actually familiar with, which is the whole Kittyverse, right? Yeah. The secondary market. And then that example that you just had, I haven't heard of crypto celebrities.
Right.
But the fact that it's, you actually do not have to ask anybody, get anyone's permission. It's just a standard powering this whole thing. And it's a relatively simple standard if you look at the stuff that allows this entire new set of mechanics to emerge.
Another interesting example of that, which didn't really, come to fruition, but it happened, but it wasn't very successful. So there were a lot of people holding crypto celebrities. There's still people holding crypto celebrities.
Right.
And so you can imagine they're very incentivized to make these things valuable, right? So another guy came along and built a crypto celebrity breeding contract.
Oh, cool.
So basically you could take two crypto celebrities, breed them together and make a new asset. The implementation was, it was, I think, people who are learning development skills.
Right.
But the idea there is pretty cool. Like the community that rallies around these crypto assets, because they can permissionally develop on top of them and they're incentivized to do so, that kind of like builds the ecosystem.
That's really cool.
Yep.
Great.
I was wondering also from your previous entrepreneurship experience. What did you learn back then that you're like now applying in OpenSea?
Yeah, I think like Alex, my co-founder, and I, we come from a traditional startup background. So like both of us have done small startups, and we also did Y Combinator, and I think those experiences have sort of driven us to take a very adopt a lot of the learnings from like the lean startup methodology and apply it to crypto, which works well for a consumer-facing app like ours, where it's almost a three-sided marketplace, right? We have buyers and sellers, and we also have developers, and so a lot of the growth hacking, just looking at what users are doing, building and shipping features fast, I think is really just the right way to approach building a company like that. For other projects in the crypto space, I think it makes sense to adopt more of like a hybrid, some incorporations of startup learnings, but some incorporating like these new sort of decentralized learnings.
So what are some of those? I mean, what was the most unfamiliar, parallel? Like what was the newest or most challenging thing coming from a previous I'm guessing SaaS startup, right?
Oh, yeah.
YC model and the startup world is like really fleshed out. What was like the most unfamiliar thing coming into the decentralized?
I think the most interesting thing about the crypto space, especially building on the dApp layer, is that you're dealing with a lot more uncertainty than you would be if you're building like a SaaS startup. So with the SaaS startup, you're going after, there's a mature market, and that's one of it's a blessing and a curse, right? Like there's customers, but there's also competition. So there's a playbook, right? You learn what your customers want, you build it for them, you grow, right? And hopefully you grow. With the crypto market, I think there's a lot more moving pieces, right? There's the underlying blockchain protocols that are changing all the time. There's a much smaller user base, especially in the sort of NFT dApp space, and there's sort of big questions around how big those are going to grow and at what time horizon. And then there's tons of companies that are tackling these problems from all different angles. So you don't really know how fast things are going to grow. And I think in that type of environment, you have to be careful, right? You have to be lean, make sure you're not like pushing a market to where it isn't, right? Like for example, for us, if there's not growth in NFT projects over the next year, like OpenSea will not be a successful project, right? Because we're not going to create the NFT market. Like we're not going to go and build all of these applications. The whole idea is that there will be lots of folks building NFTs, and they'll need a marketplace. So I think that what makes it a very exciting space is that in SaaS, for example, it's not always clear why a startup really has an advantage other than the fact that they're targeting a very specific niche, right? So I think in those types of environments, like the big companies are often really well positioned, which is why we see a lot of acquisitions, but we haven't seen as many new unicorns in the past couple of years as we did when startups were just starting to be interesting. So I think that's why the crypto space in particular is ripe for small companies as opposed to larger companies coming in and dominating.
And what's nice is that we saw in the last year or two a lot of veteran teams from gaming space who built AAA titles actually jumping into space. Still very early, a bunch of people sitting on sidelines, but I see at least 12 or 14 or so companies that actually have a lot of experience and jumped into the space and really focus on NFT actually.
I wonder if a piece of that is, people who are hungry for that ability to build a unicorn. Because some might argue that right now, because of what you said, is you have these big players sort of dominating the market, it's easier to build an acquirable company, and that's a really good strategy for an exit, versus building an actually innovative, completely new thing. It's almost like there's not a lot of space, so everything is optimizations, right? Niche things, or building on a new technology so that Cisco can come in. And I mean, I know people at Cisco, and they're saying, well, all we do is acquire companies.
Yeah, in a mature market, versus this market is completely, trailblazing.
Yeah.
Interesting. How did you also find your first customer?
Yeah, so a lot of our early growth was through Discord. So CryptoKitties had a very active Discord community. Crypto Celebrities had a very active Discord community. Pretty much 80 to 90% of new games that come out have active Discord communities. And the flywheel, so typically with a marketplace startup, the flywheel is kind of more buyers, more people viewing your site, the more sellers want to come on, and then that leads to more buyers, right?
Right.
With us, it's kind of similar, but there's a third component to it, which is that when we get our first developers building on OpenSea, and to build on OpenSea really just means launching an ERC 721 and having it be tradable kind of with OpenSea as the main marketplace, right? When that happens, users get familiar with the platform. They're like, oh, this is a place I can trade crypto collectibles and gaming items. And then the next game that comes along, the users are like, when OpenSea? Like, when is this gonna hit OpenSea so that I can trade it?
Right.
So it's actually this interesting mechanic where where people using the platform are pressuring developers to build, or maybe even just making them aware of OpenSea.
Right.
And because there's so much kind of interoperability and collaboration in the blockchain space, for example, some of the games that launch on our platform have partnerships with other games in the space. They tell them about OpenSea, and then they like make sure that they integrate with OpenSea. So a lot of it in the early days was like hustling to make sure that every single ERC 721 asset we were supporting and had a marketplace for. Now it's more like games are going to our developer docs, making sure that their things show up on OpenSea properly, which is not too difficult of a process. And then there's a little more just organic growth.
Do you have any stories about the early days, like the hustle? Like, like what?
Yeah, well, I think in the early days, there was a lot of very brittle architecture on our side in terms of supporting ERC 721. So ERC 721, from a technical side, all it is a mapping of addresses to list of unique identifiers.
Right.
And so that just that contract itself does not magically produce CryptoKitties, right? There's obviously a website for CryptoKitties. There's the cat itself, the name of the cat, the description.
And consumers are like obsessed with the metadata, but that's not the actual thing.
Yeah. So for CryptoKitties, for example, we had to go and it's not rocket science, but figure out their API and then cache all that data and stuff like that. And then for subsequent ones, they would have their own API. For crypto celebrities, for example, they didn't have an API, so we scraped the raw HTML. Nothing too crazy. It's all standard web stuff, but you can imagine scaling that type of architecture is not a really fun thing to do.
Right.
And so now, in collaboration with the Ethereum community, and primarily driven by them, there's a standard for how that metadata should look, right?
Oh, cool.
So there's a URL that's returned by the contract that produces some JSON with the name, description, image, etc. And so we've made our developer docs very friendly in terms of guiding people through how to be compliant. And now there's projects that have large amounts of volume on OpenSea that we never have to work with to integrate in any capacity, right?
So development experience is really core of your
Yeah,
focus.
and it's still not, don't get me wrong, it's still not
Work in
easy
progress.
to build an ERC 721, working with Solidity, working with Ethereum, working all those things that you guys are solving. But the process for getting on OpenSea after you've understood ERC 721 is now entirely self-serve and relatively straightforward.
That's really awesome. And when you talk to your friends outside of Web3 and decentralized world, what kind of responses do you get? Do they understand what you're working on, or?
Yeah, I think folks who like technology. I mean, it's hard. There's maybe two audiences, right? There's a completely non-technical audience, and then there's an audience who works at a startup in Silicon Valley or something like that. For the former, I think conveying this, I'm able to convey our project in a way that excites them by just saying that, imagine if, sometimes they're not gamers, so maybe they played The Sims or something like that. Imagine if you could trade the items in The Sims somewhere else, right? Or imagine if you could use an item in a trading card game in some other random game. Having that ownership over the digital asset is relatively easy to convey by sort of giving examples of why that interoperability is interesting. And then for folks in the tech community, yeah, I think it's an exciting idea that resonates with people and feels, I guess, a little bit far out for sure. But yeah, the idea of owning a digital asset. We've now started hiring, and we hire outside of the Web3 or the blockchain community, folks who like know about blockchain but don't really know about it. And I think what we've heard is like the coolness factor of this type of thing is pretty high relative to building another like SaaS startup that's just another traditional web app, which is all well and good. But I think this is an area, and I think when you're looking for exciting areas of new technology, you always want to look at what are developers doing in their side projects or like outside of work. And this is definitely something that people would do even if they weren't paid to do it, right?
So I've been finding that recently the rate I run into people who think that this is a scam or are like really, really turned off by the whole boom and bust cycle is decreasing. So it's actually the rate itself. Like I still run into them, but it's much less frequently than even a year ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the sentiment is changing.
Yeah, it feels that way. I've got no like empirical evidence of that, just in conversations.
Yeah. And what's the next chapter for you guys? Like, what's the next kind of main area of focus?
Yeah, so the big areas of focus are, number one is like taking advantage of all of the user experience improvements that are happening in the ecosystem. So tons of new wallets, tons of like fiat onboarding solutions. So we're not gonna build anything there, but we'll definitely integrate everything or integrate the ones that work really well. So I think that will push the whole space forward. Right now, acquiring Ether using MetaMask, everyone knows that process is a really long one. And then sort of in that same category is like experimenting with new blockchains that have interesting NFT projects on them. So obviously you guys like the Cosmos project are now looking into like standards for NFTs. I think, I'm not sure about EOS and Tron, but they definitely do have some projects there. So that's one category, is kind of taking advantage of the movement of the underlying infrastructure. Then the second category is we're working with bigger partners on building marketplaces for them. So we're going to be launching the marketplace for a Formula One racing game.
Oh, cool.
One of our partners. Cheese Wizards, the game out of CryptoKitties, is now launching. We're going to be the primary marketplace for that. And then we have some other projects in the pipeline that like come from these traditional gaming backgrounds and are really like trying to shake up the space. And then third is just the core functionality of OpenSea. So right now it's an auction-based marketplace. You can sell things for a fixed price. You can put them on an eBay-style auction, but we'd love to do more. So allowing people to barter NFTs, so like swap a couple of NFTs for another set of NFTs, and then adding all of the sorts of things that you might expect from a marketplace. So like favoriting things, maybe even messaging, all those things.
So how far away do you think we are from like converting an NFT into money and paying for a hamburger with it?
Converting an NFT.
You know what I mean? Like buy, like earning loot in the game, and then like you're at McDonald's and you're hungry and you're like sell loot for cheeseburger.
Sell loot for cheeseburger? I think, well, I mean, really the only thing that would need to happen is for, I don't know if I see that as an end goal, to be honest, but like if
Maybe it'll never happen.
If the cheeseburger company integrated DAI or Ether, I think that would be kind of the limiting factor. But I guess, I mean, yeah, if there's a fiat off ramp that lets you get back into dollars, you could certainly do that. I think the bigger question is, and that we're actually close to, is like how far away are we from buying an NFT with USD?
Right.
Which is, right now we sort of have a multi-step flow. You can, and there are actually companies that allow you to do that integrate with OpenSea. But for OpenSea itself, we're still just working with like payment processors to make the onboarding into Ether and then NFT really just condensed into buy an NFT with USD if you want to do that. Right.
So for me, I don't see a huge difference between NFTs that you can at some point convert to something fungible. In your mind, what is the main difference between like an ERC20 just token exchange and like an NFT market? Like there's a marketplace. In my mind, it's only the metadata, but there's got to be more to it than that.
Well, I think, I mean, it's the difference between eBay and a stock exchange.
Sure.
Which are very different interfaces, very different consumer bases, very, like, a stock exchange is is either if it's a casual user, they're just buying the stock in one click, or they're doing sophisticated trading of fungible assets. Whereas a marketplace is somewhere it can be off in the discovery portal. It's the searching, filtering, sorting, messaging, all of those sort of peer-to-peer communications that you'd find in a marketplace are very different than like what you'd find on Radar Relay or something like that.
Would you imagine people doing speculation on NFTs though?
Yeah, I think they already are.
And then coming up with things that are like tracking different,
Yeah.
maybe making like candlestick charts for like CryptoKitties, things.
Yeah, it's already sort of happening. So there's a site called nonfungible.com, kind of early site, but tracks. So the probably the most mature NFT market over the last year, although right now it's not as big as it used to be, was Decentraland, which is a land trading. It's basically land in a virtual world, and there's a lot of excitement from that community, in part because there are a lot of holders of the Decentraland token, which is Mana, but there's also a lot of land holders, and they've built a lot of tools. I mean, we have some tools as well on like monitoring the growth of that market over time. And there's a guy who his name is Maddie, and he has a site called DCLblogger.com, and it's just dedicated to how do you find good, well-priced land, and how do you value your land, and how do you make a profit. And I don't know what his overall profit has been, but I think he's making quite a lot of money just by flipping land. So and what's cool is that you could apply that same like investment mentality towards all sorts of games, right? Not just Decentraland. There are people who made a lot of money in CryptoKitties. There are people who make money in Axie. There are people who find new games and kind of try to get in early on them and then flip things. So I think it's already starting to happen. It's just kind of on a more microscopic scale.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, than in ERC20 world.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
The other like very interesting asset class that we're excited about is ENS names, which are basically the equivalent of domain names for Ethereum. And there, the domain name market, if you invested in domain names before the .com bubble, you may have made out much better than many VCs, right?
Yep.
So there's a similar sort of hybrid utility investment to those sorts of assets. And I think ENS is interesting because it's just been very, in the past, you had to be pretty technical in order to get an ENS name. Now it's 2 clicks with MetaMask.
Right.
And so I actually predict that over the next couple of months, we'll see that market become really big.
Right. It's not
Yeah.
That's interesting. And so people already.
Yeah, we just added support. So ENS just became ERC 721 compatible. So we added support a couple days ago. There's already like 500 names listed on OpenSea. There's thousands being registered over just the first couple days of the project. So I think it's the beginning of, and then right now they only have names that are above 7 characters, and they're about to release ones that are under 7 characters, which I think will be a bit.
You heard it here. Go run and get your ENS.
Get your ENS name.
And what was the most challenging so far in this journey?
Most challenging, I guess I sort of alluded to this, but I think figuring out when to scale up versus when to wait. Like, I think the biggest risk for our company is that we're too early, right? Being too early could either mean like a year too early, in which case I think our strategy is we'll be able to weather that, right? Because we're a pretty lean team. We have a lot of runway, but being 5 years too early means probably the death of our company unless we're able to sort of chug along. And we do make some revenue, so I can imagine us, puttering along and waiting for sort of the tides to shift again. But I think, I'm really glad, for example, that we didn't raise even more money last year and bring on a bigger team, because I don't think the market was ready for it. I don't think consumers were ready for it. I'm very glad that we waited this past, we didn't wait, but we just sort of built with the existing team this last year. And now it's hard to predict now what's going to happen with these new NFT projects, but I'm still very conservative about how much adoption we'll see on Ethereum, and whether even Ethereum will be a robust enough platform for NFTs. if it's not, I don't think that's a huge deal because we're relatively blockchain agnostic. But if it's not, and new blockchains aren't able to accomplish that either, I think then it'll be a challenge.
But that's more of like an existential risk of like blockchains, or like NFTs in general, right? You're saying like if Ethereum can't do it and nobody else can do it, NFTs just won't exist. I mean, then it's like, well, of course you're not going to need a marketplace for NFTs if they don't exist in the world.
And also, I have a quick question about like the whole market. So, do you think it's about usability and kind of like fixing the usability, or is it about education, or is it that market just constrained and very small? In fact,
I would actually say it's more that the experiences and content need to improve. So, CryptoKitties, I don't think many people would have played CryptoKitties if it had just been another centralized game. And so there needs to be a reason for people to want to own and use these games in some context. And right now there is to some degree, but it's not as strong as it could be. And I think that will come from multiple angles. One is just traditional gaming teams, smaller startups that are excited about blockchain, building blockchain-based assets and high-quality gaming experiences around them. And right now that doesn't really exist. And then the second is leveraging some of these pieces of interoperability to build consumer experiences that are superior to what you could do with a centralized game. So I think a cool example of that is the Crypto Foxholes game, right? Where you have this little virtual world, sort of like Minecraft. You can build stuff, but you can also bring your NFTs in it. And so you can have museums of art and like a lot of weird stuff that, it's still pretty rough around the edges, but like you can imagine in 6 months there are features that he'll be able to build that just weren't possible without some degree of interoperability between all of these assets. So I think I'm not worried, I guess, that user education is really important. I think the friction thing is huge. Like that's just gonna, reducing friction will help every single game, right? But it's sort of like an incremental thing. Whereas I think the bigger thing is the quality of the experience.
Right, there's got to be attraction before you reduce friction.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. But it seems like those new teams that joined the space a couple years ago from the gaming industry, right? They're focusing on compelling gameplays, interesting narratives. They've done it many times over. So it seems like, it's about balancing this delicate balance between gameplay and economics. And seems like, there'll be a lot of experimentation in space.
So one of the later questions I'm curious about, and if you're comfortable sharing this, go ahead, which is, what is the biggest mistake you think you made along the way so far? If there's anyone that pops out.
No, that's a good question. I think we, well, it's not that big of a mistake. Let me think about it. We definitely made mistakes. Well, there was, I think we could have worked more closely with, so right now OpenSea is powered by a set of smart contracts called Wyvern, which is, it's similar to 0x. It's an exchange protocol. It's a very generic exchange protocol that allows, you can think of it as allowing any sort of state transition swaps on a blockchain, right? So you could do something like, I'll trade you these 3 CryptoKitties if you transfer ownership of this smart contract to me, or like I'll, even something that's not even really trading, it's just, I'll do this if you do this, right? And I think when we started working with the developer who now works at Cosmos and like collaborating with him on that protocol, that was huge for us, and we probably could have done that earlier. In the very early days, we kind of wrote our own really simple smart contracts, and we've really tried to stay at this stage. We think there's so much infrastructure that exists on smart contracts that that's not where we want to operate.
Right.
So we're always looking to just build on top of things, and I think we've done a good job of orienting ourselves towards that. But there were a few times when I think we could have done that. We could have been more collaborative early on, right?
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's like everybody's building this new city, and some people are like laying down the roads, and some people are like installing lights, and like the way I envision it is like you're like, I want to set up the shop in the middle of the city.
Right.
You know, please just run your cords, and I'll plug in the electricity.
Yeah.
Please run water in here, but I don't want to be a plumber, right?
Yeah.
So I just want to set up shop. That's
Right.
cool.
Right.
Cool. All right.
It's a really good analogy. Yep. Huh. And do you see particular games getting a lot more traction than others, or do you see kind of like people dipping their hands into many different games? And
Yeah, my sense is, I haven't done a rigorous analysis of the data for it, but my sense is it's a lot of the same customer or consumers trying all of the different games, right? So as opposed to, and yeah, right now if you look at our market rankings page, there's no, there's one at the top, but there's no like, there's a bit of a power law in that there's a couple games in the top 5 and then the rest is like very low volume. But of those top games, they're all getting around the same volume. But that could definitely change. So the top ones are like My Crypto Heroes from Japan, Axie Infinity, CryptoKitties, I guess arguably Gods Unchained, the cards aren't tradable yet. There's a horse racing game called Zed Run, and these are all kind of around the same levels of volume and same number of users. So.
are there some upcoming games that you're particularly excited
Definitely
about?
excited about Cheese Wizards, which is doing their pre-sale today. Just because I think I've always really liked CryptoKitties' approach to building decentralized games. They take a much more native approach, or at least for this game, it sounds like it's a lot more native, right? They're not trying to build a Fortnite competitor in terms of graphics, but they are leveraging what's interesting about blockchain, which is asset ownership and ease of developing new things on top of Cheese Wizards, which I think will be really cool to see.
And they have that new wallet, so it's in their benefit to be very native.
Yeah, for sure. And I love the approach to their new wallet, which is, it's a smart contract wallet, which comes with some challenges, but ultimately I think is the way that, most accounts should work on the blockchain.
I agree.
Yeah.
And also looking forward, you mentioned that there are some innovations potentially on the business model side of things.
Oh yeah, so for right now, our model is we have a percentage fee on every secondary sale that happens on OpenSea, but we also allow the project developers to take a cut as well. So they can take as much of a cut on top of the 2.5% as they want. So for example, My Crypto Heroes, which uses OpenSea as their primary marketplace for buying and selling assets on Ethereum, they've made 500 or 600 ETH just based on having an OpenSea marketplace, right? They had to implement ERC 721 and do their metadata, but they didn't have to set anything up. They didn't have to exclusively partner with us, but they're now incentivized to promote us, to some extent because they benefit from those sales as well. So I think that's a cool example of having good symbiosis between the primary game and then the secondary marketplace, which is never something that has really existed in centralized third-party marketplaces for games, like Opskins, for example, right? The game has always been sort of uncertain about whether it wants that secondary marketplace to exist because they don't get to immediately benefit from it from a revenue perspective. Sometimes you can make the argument, and I think there is a valid argument to be made that having secondary marketplaces increases the exposure of the game, but it's much better to say, not only do you get a secondary marketplace, but you also get a cut of this, and then you're directly incentivized to have sales happen on these third-party marketplaces. So I think we'll probably refine the specifics of how that works, but point being, like, you can now programmatically enforce those incentive systems. Yeah. And I think that's something that technically, again, it's possible in a centralized world, but just for practical purposes, it would have been too difficult.
Well, and it goes back to that like really early idea of precedence, which is that, I think most economists would say the best way to run the world would be to create these incentive structures. And there's been a lot of regulation that's tried to do this with like just taxes, like tax incentives. And it's largely failed. This is like the first time I'm hearing where it's like, look, this is just a automated incentive. That's all it is. It's an automated set of incentives that then like is permissionless. So if I just come on and I want to put an NFT on your platform and it works out, I don't have to ask your permission. And then I find out that I'm making a lot of money off of these transactions, and then it's in my vested interest because my incentive is now to promote your thing, and your incentive is to promote my thing. It's this mutual beneficial.
Yeah.
It kind of almost solves tragedy of the commons a little bit.
Yeah.
It's a piece of it, which is pretty fascinating to me. You know, just like aligning incentives with some automated stuff.
Yeah.
But I think we're just about out of time. So first I wanted to say thanks very much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
And I have one more question, which is, do you have any advice for people who would want to start a blockchain company today?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. So I would say, I think some learnings from other companies. So there were a couple other companies in our YC batch. We obviously have a lot of contact with other startups in the space. The main, or I guess maybe there's two areas where I think you can go wrong. One is you can be a little bit too impatient. So
Right.
you can like start, so for example, for OpenSea, like we've never had a huge customer base, right? But at the same time, we know that we're operating in a brand new territory. Like no dApps have huge customer bases. And so like, while it's frustrating to sort of be operating in early space, we're not so impatient that we go and try to like build everything, so like take this mainstream before it's ready to be mainstream. So I've seen companies that are so frustrated with the size of their market that they just kind of give up, and sometimes just leave the blockchain space because they're like, they need the validation of the market, but are not, because they're maybe not sold on the vision of their company. And and in some cases I was very sold on the vision of their company, and I was like, why are you not continuing this? Like, just stay in the space, and it's gonna get really exciting.
Just hodl.
I could be wrong, but I think for any blockchain company, especially in the sort of dApp space, you have to be sold on the exciting nature of interoperable smart contracts on a blockchain. If you're not
Right.
sold on that, then you're just going to get frustrated.
Right.
The other mistake that I think folks make is I guess this is kind of, it's a different reaction to the same problem, which is just that the space is really early. But a different reaction than giving up is to go and like, try to do everything
Right.
all at once. And I think that's just, infeasible in this type of environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you and not acknowledging the trade-offs between doing everything yourself and having interoperability and decentralization. So for example, there's a lot of companies in the NFT space that are basically just building centralized NFTs.
Right.
And that's fine. Like if you have a great idea for a centralized collectible service, that could be interesting. There's Quid, which is basically a centralized sticker market, right? And it's a decent it's a big company, but you should acknowledge that you're going to be competing with the sort of design space that has been explored for now since the dawn of the internet,
Right.
And then the last mistake I would say I see people make is just not being sort of on the fence about how collaborative they want to be, right? So, and maybe this isn't a mistake, but I think there's companies that they're like uncertain whether they want to own the whole ecosystem or whether they want to play a specific role in the ecosystem. And so they end up, again, it's sort of a similar outcome, as they end up building a lot of stuff that really should be focused on by a specific company. So like building a wallet, building a blockchain explorer, building like all these things. And because they want to own the whole thing, and they haven't thought about like how to monetize and be successful in like a specific area of the space.
Right.
So
if I had to summarize, it's impatience,
Yeah.
right? Trying to do too many things at once,
Yeah.
and then not committing to one thing that you want to do, right? Is that a good summary?
Yeah, it's good summary.
Yeah, really great advice.
Sure.
Cool. Well, thanks very much.
Have me.
Yeah.
And last thing, I guess, if people want to learn for the first time about OpenSea, what's the go-to place?
So OpenSea.io is the website, and then we recently got the Twitter handle @OpenSea. So yeah, you can follow us there, or you can also join our Discord.
Great. All right. Thanks very much.
Cool. Thanks, man.